All right, hello. Welcome to the Van Gogh Wealth Show, wealth creation for attorneys, advisors, and entrepreneurs. I'm your host, as always, Sterling Van Gogh. And today we're going to talk about the only business shortcut you ever need. I'm going to tell you a really interesting story about how I learned this shortcut. The phrase shortcut sometimes has this implication that you're being lazy. I want you to go ahead and set that aside right now. There's a very big difference between doing things the smart way and being lazy. And so I presume that if you're watching this, you're perfectly capable and willing to do all the work necessary to succeed. However, as long as that is true, it doesn't make any sense to do work that is unnecessary to succeed. Would you agree with that statement? All right. So, real quick, this was my first business. This is where I learned this lesson. It's called Rock City School of Music. And to tell you a little bit about why I started that, this is me as a kid. It's like my fourth or fifth birthday. I think it was like one of the only birthdays where I actually got a gift. And then this is the house we lived in. And so we grew up really, really, really poor. I think there are reasons for that. There actually was a recession in the 90s, all sorts of stuff. But basically, this house, when we lived in it, didn't look like this. When we lived in this house, it had boards on the windows. It had plywood for floors, and where there wasn't plywood, it was dirt floors. There was no running water. There was no heat in the winter. There's no air conditioning in the summer. And I vividly remember this. My mother, brother, stepfather, and I huddled around a can of beans that Brian, stepfather, opened with a Swiss Army pocket knife, and that was dinner. Now, I wish I were making that up. That story is 100% true. It wasn't my entire childhood, but it was a very obviously it affected me. It was a real moment in time in my childhood. So I knew at the time that I didn't want to be poor, right? I figured out that, hey, this isn't that great. I don't really want to do this. So I ended up going to live with my grandparents. That's my grandmother on the left and her boyfriend, Sonny, on the right. They actually married other people, had families, both their spouses passed, and then they reconnected 50 years after their romance at the pharmacy, right before Sonny got deployed. He made it to like almost 90 drinking whiskey and smoking cigarettes every single day. He was really, really a great guy. This is me in high school at that time when I was living with them. And that's me on the left with my grandmother graduating college, and my mother on the right, also graduating college. This is the picture right before she was crying, for the record. And so I knew after college that I wanted to start a business because I didn't want to be poor. I figured, hey, business people make money. Let's go into business. All right, what's my passion? Let's start there with business. And it was at the time drumming. I'd studied music in college for a couple of years. And so I figured, hey, let's start a music related business. Well, I couldn't sell any music. I certainly wasn't that good, but I could teach. So I went into the music school, the music lessons business. And so I pitched an investor and then the bank and then the landlord, and I went all in. It was incredible, actually. I had no money. I took the idea to an investor. He said yes. I went to the bank and they saw some collateral, basically, and they said yes. And then I went to the landlord and said, I can't really justify paying full rent here. And he gave it to me for half price. And so all the stars aligned and it was time to go all in. And I didn't know much, but I knew that I needed customers. All right, that much was pretty obvious. So I bought all the advertising I could afford. I bought Google ads, Facebook ads, Yelp ads, Yahoo ads, phone book ads. I even paid this insane monthly bill for SEO, which brought me zero business, by the way. I bought a direct mail campaign. I hung flyers at universities and coffee shops. I knocked on doors, cold knocked all around the neighborhood, got clients that way. It's actually how I got my very first client. And I even stood on the side of the road with a sign. I got business that way too. So basically, I tried everything but radio and TV. It seemed to me that radio and TV were just selling air. In the case of radio, it was literal air time. But they couldn't tell me any kind of return on investment, what to expect. It just seemed really expensive, and there was no targeting, right? I couldn't say parents of children that want to learn music. So anyway, this is me at that time of my life. This is the actual music school. Right here, I'm working on some advertising. You can see this right here. It's my cat, Special Agent Jack Bowers, aka the Shadow, because she followed me everywhere. She really was my shadow, and I mean, she followed me everywhere, every hour of the day. So when it was all said and done, having gone all in on this music school, it had been 90 days, and pretty much I was almost out of money. And I remember looking at the numbers and going to sleep with the saddest and heaviest feeling I had ever felt. I was going to fail. And it was my childhood dream to have a business so I wouldn't have to be poor anymore. Who wouldn't want that? And so my wife and kids wouldn't have to be poor either. Who wouldn't want that? And I poured my heart and soul into that mission, only to last 90 days. Thankfully, to this day, I've actually never been so down in my life. That was the only time. Okay, but then something started to happen. Something started to work, and the phone started ringing like crazy. And when I asked everyone how they found me, they all said Google Ads. So I did the math. Google Ads cost me about 185 bucks a month, yet it brought in 95% of my business. The other $9,800 was a total waste. Total waste. And while it's very important to test your media mix, which is essentially what I ended up doing, there's an even bigger lesson I learned that I will never forget. And whenever I meet with my consulting clients, this is the first thing that we agree on and use to proceed with strategy with zero exceptions. And I'll never forget this lesson because I learned it the hard way by putting my dreams on the line and betting the farm, which I don't recommend. But that's how I learned this lesson. And this lesson is foundational to why most campaigns that I deploy have been world class from day one. And they continue to crush it every day after that. And even then, they only continue to have better and better numbers, right? So I'm usually hitting home runs right on the first swing, have done so actually the last 7, 8, 9, 10 times in a row-ish. So if you were to retain me for consulting, every single meeting, I would remind you of this fact, and it would be worth 1,000 times what you had paid. All right, if you decide that you want me to be your consultant and you pay me the monthly, and we're on contract, I would remind you of this fact on every single meeting, and it would be worth 1,000 times what you'd invested. So here's what I learned. Well, what I did technically worked, right? It was gut-wrenching, fear-inducing, time expensive, money expensive, and the most stressful thing I'd ever experienced up to that point. And what I could have done instead was pick up the phone and call any music school owner in the country and ask what works, right? I could have picked up the phone. They were not direct competitors. We were geographically isolated. I could have called a guy in California, Florida, Chicago. Hey, I'm new in the business. I already signed the lease. So what works, right? If I had spent even one day doing that, I would have saved 90 days of painful trial and error and 9,800 wasted dollars, and I wouldn't have had dark clouds over my head and the weight of the world on my shoulders, wondering if I was going to fail at trying to achieve my childhood dream and disappointing my inner child, right? Like, it was a really terrible, terrible feeling. If I'd spent one day, I could have skipped all of that and saved the $9,800. So the lesson is this: whatever you are trying to do, never, ever, ever try to figure out the answer. Never. Instead, always, always, always find the person who has already figured out the answer so you can skip over all the beatings. This is why we get it backwards. School taught us backwards. You remember school, right? It was cheating to go and ask for the answer from a peer, right? Well, that's not how life actually works. Life is an open book test. And in many ways, some things are pass or fail. So school, they literally shamed us for asking for the answer from someone else. They called it cheating. You got in trouble. You might get detention, or you might fail the test. I mean, they punished and shamed us for doing one of the most important things you can do in business, which is find out what the answer is, right? Because in business, the cost of failure is too much. What had happened if I had a family of 3, a wife, a mortgage, and all this stuff? You think I'm going to go there in music school, into the music school business, and just guess and hope that my kids don't go hungry? I mean, the risk is too big. There's too much on the line to sit there and guess. And so in business, the fastest way to succeed is to ask the person who has already achieved the level of success you're interested in. Now, that of course presumes that you're not direct competitors. In many cases, you can find a mentor. I actually formalize this process. Now, I have mentors in different areas. I have a consultant for which I give them 10% of the company. And this is the only shortcut you'll ever need. Whatever it is you're trying to do. If you're trying to hire a sales team, get on the horn with someone who's already done it. If you're trying to run Facebook ads, get on the horn with someone that's already done it. If you're trying to sell your business, get on the horn with someone who's already sold a business. Talk to as many of them as you can. There's too much at risk to simply guess and learn a lesson on the first try. Because as I say, something to keep in mind, the first is the worst. No matter what you're doing, the first time you do it, it's going to be the worst time you do it, all right? I remind myself of that as often as possible. So again, guys, experience is the most expensive teacher. Never, ever, ever try to find the answer. All right. Always, always, always find the person who already knows the answer. That's not cheating. That's called being smart. All right. That's taking all your horsepower and putting it towards something that is extremely high leverage. So in doing so, you get to start at the 99-yard line. And skip over all of the beatings. So look, if you found this helpful, go ahead and say so in the comments wherever you're experiencing this episode, audio, video, wherever it is. If you found this helpful, say so in the comments. Thanks for tuning in for this episode of the Van Gogh Wealth Show. I'm Sterling Van Gogh, and we'll see you next time.